Good evening and welcome to Kentucky Tonight. I'm Renee Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us. We continue our conversations with U.S. House and Senate candidates running in the June 23rd primary. We're delighted to be joined by three Democratic candidates for the U.S. Senate who met KET's criteria and accepted our invitations to appear. Mike Broihier is a retired Marine lieutenant colonel, a farmer and former newspaper editor. In the last few days, it's been some trying last few days in Kentucky and across the nation. Protests have erupted in response to police killings of George Floyd in Minneapolis, EMT Breonna Taylor in Louisville. Mr. Broihier, same question to you. And today I'll add that Tamika Palmer demanded justice for her daughter Breonna at a press conference the governor held earlier this morning. And the family wants the police officers in her death to be charged. They want them to be fired first and eventually charged in Breonna's death. Do you agree with that? And what specific policy proposal will you be committed to, whether you win or lose this primary?
Well, I do agree. I think that the firing of the chief of police of Louisville Metro is maybe too late, obviously, but I think it's a good start. And I think
Which came today.
Which came today, yes, ma'am. But, you know, I started my campaign back in July. It was founded on call for economic and social justice for all. And as time went on, things just sped up. They just got, as we went through the black jewel miners having their wages stolen, and then a impeachment hearing and the impeachment trial, then a global pandemic that's left over 110,000 Americans dead. And now the great cities of our country are burning. And that call for social and economic justice isn't a request anymore. It's a demand. What
does it look like, in your view? Specifically, what does it look like? What will you do? You can call for it, but people want to know what you plan.
Absolutely. You know, I think we have to do is, first of all, we have to demilitarize our police forces. You know, we've been telling them there's been a war on drugs for decades. You know, and this war, you tell someone they're at war for long enough, and they start believing they're at war. You know, we can start the process by stopping selling military equipment to police forces. I mean, there's no reason that a municipal police department or county police department needs to have armored vehicles. It sets the wrong mindset in the police. The police think they're at war. War, you need an enemy, and the enemy, sadly, too many times are African Americans.
Mr. Broihier, should the Kentucky National Guard be called off?
I think so. This is a very sensitive and difficult operation. You know, I was coming into the building tonight with my wife, and there was a young law enforcement officer out there, and he looked like, no offense to him, but he looked like a baby. And I could not imagine him facing a crowd and what thoughts and fear would be going through his mind. And the National Guardsmen are no different than that. And most of them have not received training. This is a very, very difficult thing to do. I think I tried to understand what the idea was, that maybe put someone on the street who wasn't a Louisville police officer, but it blew up. And I'll tell you, I still do not understand where the shooting is coming from, with the hundreds of cameras that are rolling on the streets, and no one can say where the shooting is coming from. It does not make any sense to me at all.
A question on the Second Amendment, an email from Abby Rogers of Madison County. Mr. Broihier, I'll give this question to you first.
Sure.
What are the candidates' thoughts on the Second Amendment, and what do the candidates pledge to do to combat gun violence?
Well, thanks for the question, and thanks for the person who wrote in as well. I'm very, very proud to be a Moms Demand Action candidate of distinction. And I actually met Moms Demand Action my very, very first weekend campaigning, and I've been on board ever since. The Kentucky moms have got two simple things that they realize this is Kentucky and it's a gun state. So they have two simple goals: universal background checks and red flag laws, like you find in the Violence Against Women Act. Both of those laws have come out of the House with overwhelming bipartisan support. They have overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate, and they've not moved forward for one reason: because Mitch McConnell doesn't want them to, because he is in the pocket of the gun industry and the NRA. These are laws that are completely supported by the American people, even most members of the NRA. When I go to the Senate, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clear off Mitch McConnell's desk, and we're going to have universal background checks, and we're going to pass the Violence Against Women Act.
Will you call for the resignation of Mayor Greg Fisher?
I believe that he needs to be accountable for what he's doing now, and that these officers should be fired, and that it needs to happen immediately, and that he needs to provide clear transparency on how he will make things better moving forward.
So that is a no.
If he can do
you will not call for the resignation of the mayor of Louisville?
Well, if he can do those things, he will earn his stay.
Mr. Broihier, the question to you.
It's two-parter.
Two-parter, but answer the last part of that question first, please, sir. Would you be willing to call for the resignation of the Louisville mayor?
I would. If he does not take responsibility for this, if he does not change things immediately, I mean, I'm glad that he fired the chief, but the body cams need to come out, and I'm talking about pronto. If not, I would gladly call for his resignation.
Hyatt Allen, a graduate student in Lexington, asked this question of you, Ms. McGrath, and you, Mr. Broihier. Have you been on the ground in Louisville with the protesters the last 3 days, or in Lexington or elsewhere?
No, Renee, I have not. And I'll tell you, with my campaign, I only have two hard and fast rules with my campaign staff. They don't talk about war, combat, valor, leading Marines, my voice. And the other hard and fast rule we have is we don't use people as props. And I thought about it and I said, if I went to Louisville or Lexington, it would have appeared opportunistic. And I did not want to be put in that position. If I was a citizen, just a regular old taxpayer, I'd be with them. But I just did not want it to appear like I was trying to take advantage of people who are really suffering.
So the last question on this particular topic comes from Heather Ayer, or Ayer.
Props, Renee.
Say it again?
We're not props.
Heather Ayer from Frankfurt. This question, do you support defunding the police and redirecting those funds to communities directly affected by police brutality and systemic racism? Mr. Broihier, your response first.
I think we need police. We can't defund the police. We can't make them go. We can fundamentally change them, but we cannot make them go away. So defunding them, I mean, redirecting funds that are being wasted, sure. But I think a better use of our money would be this, is that we stop having prisons that are for profit. We have this cycle where politicians make laws. They get donations from people who run prisons, and we've created this process where people are the material that go into this machine. We need to break this cycle. I'd rather take the money and the profit out of prisons and use that for helping people instead of it going to pockets of politicians who keep this horrible cycle of imprisonment and this pipeline from high school to prison going. That's where we need to break the money chain.
Mr. Broihier, same question to you. And I do want to ask you, what if issues have been brought to light or magnified as we've dealt with this pandemic that you would be committed to answering should you be able to serve in the United States Senate?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have a healthcare system that's tied to employment, and one of the only ones in the world. And we've just put 40 million Americans on unemployment. That's 40 million American households probably facing the greatest healthcare crisis in the last 100 years without healthcare insurance. So that's why we need to have a single-payer healthcare system. And I want to build one from the ground up. But for now, we need to blow open Medicare for all and make it available for everyone. Now, when I started, I've been an advocate of universal basic income. When I first started my plan, we said $1,200 a month, $400 per child. And what was the first payment that came out of Congress? $1,200 a month. Not $400 a child, but $1,200 a month. And then when the pandemic struck, I came out with a proposal for emergency universal basic income. $2,000 a month per adult, $1,000 per child. And now Congress is actively talking about $2,000 a month. We need to have a UBI all the way through the pandemic and the ensuing depression or recession that's going to follow it, and then switch to a full-time UBI of $1,200 per adult, $400 per child from then on.
So you envision some type of universal basic income in perpetuity?
Yes, ma'am. That's why I was endorsed by Andrew Yang and Humanity Forward. I've got a guy named Scott Santens from the World Economic Forum who's helped me draft my plan. And the reason that my numbers match those that are coming out of Congress is because there's a math behind them. And because we've done the math, we can implement it and we can pay for it.
So would you be for everyone, regardless of income, having a universal basic income, or should there be some income thresholds?
Nope. That's why that's the universality and universal basic income goes to everybody. No checks. No.
Even the one percenters.
Even the one percenters will claw that back in taxes.
Mm-hmm. And the wisdom, some would say, if it's all about trying to equalize income inequality, that giving that bump of money to those who really don't need it doesn't make much sense. Your response would be?
Well, if it's about equalizing, someone who's that 1% isn't even going to feel it. But somebody who's living in poverty, who's now dragged out of poverty, they're absolutely going to feel it. If you're talking about incremental good, who's going to have? Bill Gates is not going to care about that $1,000, but somebody living in poverty is going to have incredible change in their life.
Critics would say that it equates to a handout and that it would disincentivize work. Your response to that criticism?
Well, it's just not true. It doesn't happen. There is a program just like this in Alaska, and no one would say, and it's been in effect for 30 years. no one would say that Alaskans are lazy and don't go to work. And every single place this has been tried is not proven to be a disincentive to labor at all. People's lives are just dramatically improved. And here's the best part about it. When I talk to people in the country, my neighbors are all farmers, but they farm in the headlights of their pickup trucks and their tractors because they love to farm, but they got to have another job. But if you say to them, how different would your life be if you had $1,200 a month? You can just see the light come up in their eyes and the gears start turning. And I'll tell you what they would do. They would farm full time because they love farming. And it's important to them. They feed their community. They're good wardens of the soil. They're good for the environment.
Some Kentuckians would say this is exactly what we fear, another plank in the socialist agenda that most Kentuckians would rebuke.
Well, you know, if we're going to give money to anybody, here's a choice. We give it to corporations or we give it to people. You give money to people, to the middle class, to the working class, the working poor. They spend that money. They spend it locally, and it develops tremendous velocity, and it gets spent over and over and over. You give money to a rich person, you give it to a corporation like we did back in 2009 with the airline industry. We gave them $50 billion, and they used $45 billion to buy back their own stock and enrich themselves.
Mr. Broihier, you've talked about Democrats who were running Republican light. Do you believe that Ms. McGrath is one of those candidates, and is it your view that that is a path to defeat?
It is, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, this, and part of the problem is this, is that in 2018, for example, Colonel McGrath was critical of Brett Kavanaugh. And then she lost her race in the 6th Congressional District. And then in 2020, when she's running for U.S. Senate, she changed her mind and said that she would have voted to elevate Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And then there was a massive backlash here by voters in Kentucky, and particularly women, who saw this as an insult. And then she took it back. So she flip-flopped again and again and again on this issue that should be a no-brainer for any kind of progressive candidate. And so we have this history in Kentucky for the last 35 years of running nice but centrist candidates against Mitch McConnell and getting creamed every time. If you want to excite people, you have to give them a vision, a path forward, a progressive leadership idea. And that's what's important. In these times, we've got this transactional leadership where everything is focused on money. We have to be transformational leaders. We have to describe a better future that everyone believes in and then provide them a path forward. Not, I'm just a little less worse than Mitch McConnell. On
questions of reproductive freedom, Mr. Broihier, where do you stand?
Absolutely. Roe versus Wade was correctly decided in 1973. I absolutely will not put a judge on the federal bench that does not agree to that. And judges are key. I know things are nuts in the country right now, and I know the news is full of things that are keeping people a little bit distracted. But Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham are telling us what's going on. Mitch McConnell has been signaling this for a year when he told people here in Kentucky, I am changing America forever. And he was talking about judges. Lindsey Graham was on TV just this week asking older judges that are 60 years or older to step aside. And what he said in that press conference was that President Trump has appointed 1 out of 5 federal judges with lifetime appointments. And Senator Graham and Senator McConnell want these older judges, and 60 is not old for a judge, to step aside so they can put a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old on the bench. So when Mitch McConnell says he's changing America forever, he's talking about judges that are hostile to women, people of color, LGBTQ persons, immigrants, labor, basically everyone who's not an old white man.
There's some questions about the pandemic. We're going to revisit some topics that we've had before and do maybe a lightning round if time permits. So this question comes from Betty Pendergrass of Bardstown, Kentucky. What legislation would you propose to help rebuild our economy after this pandemic? Mr. Broihier, I'll start with you.
Well, I have a plan called Just Transition to a Green Economy, and I've already been reaching out to candidates in adjoining states, the 7 adjoining coal-producing states. Richard Ojeda in West Virginia, Blair Wolsingham down in Tennessee. And I'm talking to them about us not going to Washington asking, but demanding that we bring social and economic justice to Appalachia. And how do we do this? We do it through infrastructure, big infrastructure. And I'm not embarrassed to say this, Works Project Administration level infrastructure. Key to that will be turning eastern Kentucky and all of Appalachia, coal-producing area, into a green energy hub for the eastern half of the United States. And that is roads, bridges, rural broadband, water for places like Martin County, where they can't even drink the water that
What's
comes
the
out of
price
the tap.
tag of that kind of proposal?
You know what? I don't know what the proposal is, but I can tell you what the return on investment is for, or the payback period for solar is 7 years. When you put solar in, 7 years later, it's paid for itself, and after that, the energy is paying for itself. So that's a relatively good return on investment for something you can get free energy from. And you don't have to believe in climate change. I happen to believe in climate change, but you do a large-scale green energy program like this, you put people to work, you build the infrastructure, and industry follows infrastructure. So other businesses will come to Kentucky and to Appalachia and put not just our coal miners to work, but their children and their grandchildren to work. And if you happen to believe in climate change like I do, you put a huge dent in the nation's carbon footprint.
Mr. Broihier, who would be your Veep pick?
Kamala Harris.
Why?
Because I just love her mind. She's incredibly sharp. She's incredibly tough. And I would love to see her debate Mike Pence.
And she had the plan on the universal basic income. I believe that was $2,000,
well,
so you might
too,
mesh on that.
But
Final comment tonight that you would like to make in about 30 seconds.
About 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. We have to pick somebody of these three. Anybody up here would be a much better candidate than Mitch McConnell. But Mitch McConnell's held a stranglehold on rural votes for the last 35 years. I'm the best choice to run in all 120 counties.
How can you beat Mitch McConnell?
By running in all 120 counties. I'm a veteran, I'm a teacher, and I'm a farmer, like a real honest to goodness bend over and pick the crops farmer, and that carries a lot of weight in Kentucky. I'm the person they know, I'm the person they trust, and I can run in every single corner of this state, and that's what you need to have to beat Mitch McConnell.
Put the money in our hands. 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 Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.